All right, so I want you all to time travel for a moment back to the late 90s. I'm a 19-year-old sitting in a metal and vinyl office chair, and my hands have a death grip on the arms, and I'm feeling an intense sense of anger and unfairness because I'm being told that the help I've been getting from the state foster care agency is coming to an end. So this day had started off, fairly innocuously. I hopped on the T and headed to the Fields Corner DSS office, which was the Massachusetts State Foster Care Agency at the time, in Dorchester, Mass. It was tucked into a little industrial park right next to the train tracks, which were helpfully screeching all the time. And it was just about 2 miles and 2 subway stops away from UMass Boston, where I was a sophomore at the time, studying philosophy and art. And I hopped into the office kind of hopeful because I was going in for my annual case review. And I was ready to brag about how well I was doing because I was holding down a part-time job. I was on the dean's list in school, and I thought I'd be able to talk about how well I was doing with the help of the department. But once the meeting started and the DSS manager started talking to me, my limbic system kind of kicked into high gear, and I could feel my blood pressure rising, my face getting hot, my molars starting to grind as my jaw tensed up because I could sense something was wrong. Because I wasn't getting praise for the good work that I had been doing. Instead, I was getting interrogated. I was being asked, how long do you think you'll need help anyway? Don't you think that it's time for you to be out on your own? Aren't you ready to be independent? And now, those of you who know me know that I'm a pretty talkative guy, but this silenced me. I was flabbergasted and furious, being told that the help that I was getting that was helping me succeed was going to go away. And so I tried my best to push back and to say, hey, I've been doing pretty good, trying to do the song and dance to make the case that I should stick around. But it was super clear to me that the decision had been made and that my time getting help was over. So I was angry, I was dejected, I hopped back on the train and felt a kind of hopelessness. How was I going to end up finishing school? How was I going to stick it out without this help? And so I imagine that all of you in this room probably have felt something like that in the past. Like the moral scales of the universe had collapsed and failed you. Or like the thing that you were experiencing, like the cruelest scriptwriter in Hollywood couldn't have cooked up something as bad as what you were experiencing. And that's how I was feeling, a sense of unfairness and injustice. And it was really rooted in a sense of deservedness for me, that I felt like I had been doing all the right things, working hard, playing the game, and that I deserved to get that help. And so I want you to put aside that sense of deservedness that's probably intuitive for you at the moment about who deserves what on the basis of merit or good choices. And instead, I want you to reflect. And I want you to reflect on something very specific, which is a time in your life or a circumstance where you got something for nothing, where you got some kind of helpful resource or you were in a kind of environment that helped you succeed that you did absolutely nothing to merit access to. So this could play out differently for any of you in the room. So some of you may have had a family that was well off enough to pay for you to go to school. Some of you, based on the way that you look, maybe never have to sweat walking or driving down any street and worrying about whether you'll be safe. Some of you maybe just had the privilege of having been born in an industrialized society. But the bottom line is that there's plenty of these things that all of us could list that are these things that really have helped us succeed and thrive that we did exactly nothing to earn, but we got them anyway. And so if you rest on that list for a moment and then start thinking about all the stuff in our society that people maybe do or don't have access to, that sometimes is framed around this issue of deservedness, I think that you'll start to see that some of these intuitive stories we tell ourselves about who deserves what and why start to break down. So ask yourself questions about the resources that we deploy in our society and who deserves them. So who deserves exactly to get 3 full meals a day? Who deserves to be able to see a doctor? Who deserves to always have a roof over their head? And importantly, if you're starting to answer those questions, think about the opposite of it. Who doesn't deserve to get those things? Who deserves not to have access to those resources? And your brain may start wandering you down a path that is that intuitive deservedness thing, where you start saying, well, these folks have made really good decisions, or those folks have these merits, but I want to pause you before you go too far down that path, because I just ask you to create a litany in your head of stuff that you got through no merit of your own, and we've all got them. And so this is a really challenging set of questions for us to ask once we start then reflecting on the way that resources are deployed across our society. Because they're deployed often on the basis of what we see as merit. But I want you to think about what the world would look like if we didn't do it that way. What if we made good things easy to get? And what if we made them easy to get not on the basis of anything having to do with some quality that you possess or some good choices that you made, but just on the basis of you being human and therefore deserving it? What if even we said that you can make really bad decisions and do terrible stuff, and we will still say that you deserve access to resources and help? What would happen if we designed our society in a way that made help easy to get? And I'll pose it to you that this is actually something we could do if we wanted to. We've got the resources. We've got the technical capacity to make things easy to get. What would that look like if we did that? If people who needed help didn't have to go through the kinds of processes to get food that they have to go through to get WIC or SNAP? If people that wanted to go to school didn't have to jump through all the hoops of filing the FAFSA to get federal aid? If people that needed cash didn't have to do all of the undignified stuff that they have to do to get access to something like TANF? If we wanted to, we could make all of those things much easier to get and not rooted in these false notions of deservedness. And now ask yourself, well, what would that look like if we started doing that? And I think, luckily, we've got enormous bodies of research that tell us what would happen. So think, for example, about chronic scarcity, not having enough of any key resource, and what we know about what that does to us behaviorally and cognitively. And what we know is that if you make good things easy to get, it's exactly the people who have the fewest resources that will benefit the most. Think, for example, about if you make food easy to get. We know that that will boost the performance of students. If you make cash easy to get, we know that it helps people have better mental health outcomes. So the bottom line is that the evidence tells us that generosity is good policy. So why don't we have that? Why can't we have nice things? Why do we say that as a society, we don't deserve that? Well, let me rewind you back to 19-year-old Anthony. You probably felt a little bit of reciprocal injustice on my behalf. Yeah, you were doing really well. They should have given you that help. And that's partially because of the story I told you. I could have told you maybe a different story about a different kid. So instead of telling you a story about doing well in school, I could tell you a story about a kid who maybe was getting arrested a lot for writing graffiti. Or a kid who really liked to get high and stay up all night playing Final Fantasy VII. Or a kid who was really notoriously bad at making appointments with social workers. And I think that you all get the point that all of those things were also true about me, in addition to the good stuff that I said. And so how many of those negative attributes, of those bad choices, would I have to lay out for you until you switched your position and said, actually, Anthony, I don't care how well you were doing in school. You didn't deserve it because you were making bad choices. And I could even make it easier for you. I could rewind back to high school when I wasn't holding down a job and I wasn't getting good grades. I was just a terror. I could tell you about an Anthony who constantly cut classes to smoke butts in the bathroom. Did he deserve to be cut any slack? Did the kid who was constantly getting suspended for carrying weapons and getting into fights deserve not to get expelled? Did the kid who was flunking Latin and chemistry deserve to keep his place in a prestigious school? Well, I don't know. But I got all of those things. And here's the thing that I want you to consider. If you think about your lives and you replay your life story and you press pause at any random moment, I think there's a reasonable case to be made that you might pause yourself in a moment where you're doing great and you can make an excellent argument for you meriting all of the good things that you've gotten in life. Or you might press pause at a moment where you were in a bad place, having made a bunch of bad decisions, and you didn't deserve any of the help that you've gotten in life. And that's because we're all complicated. We all contain multitudes of good and bad. And yet, I think, despite all of that, we're all deserving. And so this is the question that we've got to ask ourselves. Why do we set up our society in a way that presumes that people don't deserve stuff? So let me conclude 19-year-old Anthony's story. So I was sitting on the subway, got off the train, and immediately called my adolescent outreach workers. This is like an auxiliary social worker for kids that are older and ready to age out of care. And I explained what had happened to me. And so she picked up her phone and called some people in the central office who knew me, and they picked up their phone and called some people in the area office and exerted some pressure. And, short story, they reversed the decision. And I was able to stay in DSS custody until I graduated from college. And because of that, I spent 15 years of my career fighting to make sure that other kids that had had similar experiences got access to the same kinds of resources and opportunities that I got. And this is everything from legislative advocacy that resulted in us having the state legislature allocate funds for students to be able to go to private schools if they were in foster care in Massachusetts, to policy changes that made it easier to stay in care after 18, to the tuition waiver program, so that the state wouldn't charge their own kids to go to a school that they owned and controlled. And all of that was because of a lucky break. One reversal of fortune at 19. Now, did I do anything in particular to merit that lucky break? Did I earn it somehow? Clearly not. But did I deserve it? I think so. And I think that's because all of us deserve to have access to the things that will help us succeed and thrive. All of us deserve to be treated with dignity and respect and to have our autonomy enhanced. All of us deserve to be able to thrive and flourish in this world. And so, if you agree with that statement, then I think what it demands of you is to have a new understanding of deservedness. And I think what it demands of all of us is that our society needs to tell a different story about who deserves what. That isn't rooted in the actions we've taken or the choices we've made, but that's simply rooted in our humanity. And I think that our social policy needs to look different, and it starts by us accepting a different premise about deservedness. Namely, that if any one of us deserves help, every one of us deserves help. Thanks.